I became the Pope and kissed the cement.
Okay.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Today is Thursday, June 22nd, 2022. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. We're streaming live on YouTube for Insight and McFarlane Media, also for Black Press USA, streaming live on Facebook for Insight, also on Twitter and LinkedIn. And if you're connecting with us on any of those platforms, we look to engage you, to get your ideas, your viewpoint. We want you to like, subscribe, share, whatever you can do to join the conversation and also to propagate the conversation. That's what we want you to do. So we want to build a community of and around conversation. I call us companions, friends, people that are looking at moving in the same direction to build community, to build our culture, and to build the kind of world that we think our children and our neighbors deserve. Well, with that, I'm glad to see my colleague and brother Ndugu Yusef Mgeni here and Sister Brenda Lyle Gray. And let's just jump off. We were talking before we aired about the fact that I have published for Monday's edition of Insight News a story on the hearings that are going on right now. And Yusef, you're making comments about it. Will you talk about it, if you wouldn't mind, review the stunning and heartbreaking story about Sister, I think it's Shy Moss. I might not be saying her first name the right way, but
and her mother.
And her mother. Talk about that first, if you would, Yusef.
Sure. The travesty is that these two Black women were singled out by the president for allegedly passing a jump drive or a USB drive with information about voters in Georgia and voting multiple times in the name of these voters, because the mother and the daughter worked for the local election bureau, fielding calls and providing citizens with information about how to vote, voting by mail, early voter registration, etc. And what happened was that the daughter asked the mother for a breath mint, and the mother passed her a ginger mint, a lifesaver or something like that. And it had nothing to do with a USB or a jump drive being passed between the two women. They were ostracized. There were death threats. People came to their home. They had to literally go into hiding because of their fear of violence. The trauma was just incredible. The daughter, I think, has gained 60 or 70 pounds just from the stress since the incident originally occurred. And I'll try and get my picture back online, Al. I'm not sure what's happening here. You know I'm a Luddite. I think I've got Monday's edition of Insight up instead. But the situation was just one example of the type of intimidation, the big lie, stop the steal, that the January 6th committee hearings have been bringing full force into the face of the American public, because the finger is pointing directly at President Trump, at his attorney, at his campaign team, and it's being pointed by Republicans. It's being pointed by state secretaries of state. It's being pointed by 38 members of the Georgia state legislature who were contacted by Clarence Thomas's wife, Virginia Ginny Thomas, who encouraged the White House to call out the National Guard, to declare martial law, and to seize all of the voting machines in the swing states that were clearly won by Joe Biden as opposed to the president himself. And the evidence demonstrates too thoroughly to debate that the president, his attorney, and the campaign team and the White House and the Republican supporters knew about it full well. Furthermore, there was a member of the Senate, a Republican, who took people on a tour on January 5th who actually participated in the January 6th insurrection. He literally filed a complaint against the Democratic Congresswoman who had originally requested that the Capitol Police investigate the fact that legislators were leading tours in restricted areas of the U.S. Capitol and the House and Senate chambers. He denied it vociferously and suggested that she needed to be investigated for even raising the allegation. Well, it turns out that the January 6th committee obtained footage showing this Republican senator leading these Proud Boys and others on a tour of the Capitol, of the Senate and the House chambers. They were photographing private entrances and directories and people's offices, and then participated in the insurrection the next day, breaking into the Capitol and chanting and looking for Nancy Pelosi or Vice President Mike Pence, and constructing a hanging platform outside the Capitol to hang Mike Pence, whether it was symbolically or realistically, I'm not sure. But the hearings have been shockingly informative in terms of who knew, when they knew, the fact that they knew that it was wrong, the fact that they were advised by their own legal counsels and constitutional lawyers that the actions they were proposing were illegitimate, unconstitutional, and illegal. The fact that the president was encouraging people to go ahead and create alternative sets of state electors to try and cast votes for Trump and say that they were the official electors representing their states in multiple states. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, okay? It was an absolute coup attempt in the United States. And more than 700 people have been arrested and are facing trial and charges for the insurrection. And the Justice Department has now begun issuing subpoenas. And yesterday in Georgia and in Virginia, actually arrested people and delivered indictments against participants who helped facilitate the various actions that I've just discussed. The question is whether they are going to attempt to indict the former occupant of the White House or not. And Merrick Garland has indicated that they are listening to the January 6th hearings intently. They have also requested a great deal of information because the researchers in the House working with the January 6th committee have done a better job of uncovering information than the FBI and the Justice Department. So now they're saying, hey, would you mind sharing that information with us so that we can continue our investigation? But
Yusef, what about the raid on Jeffrey Clark's home yesterday? The former attorney.
Wasn't that one of
Jeffrey Clark?
Yeah, wasn't that one of the FBI personal appearances yesterday in the home of some of the January 6th perpetrators?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, they're getting very serious. We're getting very close.
But they didn't say what they got. But they asked this morning, they said, well, they had to have had a lead on something for them to get a judge to give them a warrant to be able to go and search his home.
Mm-hmm.
So it must be pretty deep.
I think it is all over. In all over the country. And whether the Justice Department will follow through or not remains to be seen, but we have to hope that those who are responsible will be held accountable.
I think after this video, they will. That video was prior to. So I think when Discovery, releases that, I think it's sometimes in July 10th, a whole lot will surface. And they didn't anticipate going past today. But then all of the stuff has surfaced. And so they're going to go after the 4th of July and they will have other hearings. Interesting.
So do you think Trump will ever be indicted again? That's what Bobby and I talk about. Both of us feel and think and hope that he will actually be indicted and tried for criminal action. Both the ones we're hearing about now, but at some point in time, there has to be public disclosure of the discovery associated with his taxes and with his business dealings. He's successfully avoided prosecution and public scrutiny up to now. But at some point in time, all the records, he said, couldn't be presented because they were being worked on, and because he was a candidate, all of that's passed. And at some point, there has to be
went down the toilet.
Yeah, here's the dilemma. Congress can indict the president. The Justice Department has to indict the president. And they have been not reluctant, but playing their cards fairly close to the vest. And I think that they're waiting, I hope that they're waiting until they accumulate as much information as possible, which can only strengthen any attempt at an indictment, rather than just going in with only a handful of evidence. And you will recall that many of the Republicans very close to the center of this attempted coup have pled the Fifth Amendment hundreds of times in front of the January 6th committee. So there have been surprisingly a number of Republicans who went in and have been perfectly honest and provided full disclosure. But there were also a number who had, wheelbarrows full of information, who pled the Fifth Amendment hundreds of times. Mm-hmm. So I think the Justice Department is, in effect, lining up its ducks, because many times nothing occurs in Washington until there's absolute certainty of the outcome. And I don't think that's any different with the Justice Department. They want to be confident that they can get an indictment before they attempt to indict former president of the United States, because there's a lot of constitutional law involved, because on January 6th and up until January 20th, he was still an occupant of the White House. Yep. Now, he could have been indicted while he was in the White House, but now that he's out of the White House, to be indicted for actions that occurred during that period is a very complicated legal matter. And many people think, well, if he's guilty, bring him in and charge him and put him in jail. It's not quite that simple.
I asked Al yesterday, and I was surprised. I very seldom am able to stump him, but one of my students asked me, did they take Trump's passport? Is it in hands where he can't flee the country? I mean, and this is from a millennium. I had him when he was in the 9th grade, and he asked me that, and I said, well, he said, "B. Gray, ask your boss." And Al said, well.
No idea.
I'm not a lawyer, Brenda, but when legal proceedings were to begin, a judge would have to issue that restriction, and seize the passport. So Congress couldn't do it. The Justice Department could request it, but that would be a judicial action that would have to occur in a court of law.
So he could leave legally.
Well, he could leave, but he could also be extradited. And if a subpoena is issued, he would be required. Some of the people, like, who was the boy who was the chair of Breitbart? They brought contempt charges against him because he refused to show up. A number of Republicans have refused to show up for the January 6th hearings because they believe that they're unconstitutional and they have no legal jurisdiction or validity for doing it, which is just stupid. If you have nothing to hide, come forward and testify.
Oh,
But
well, you know better than that.
yeah, and the president has been caught, the former president, lying on so many occasions in terms of his selective memory, as have many of the people who were in the inner circle in the White House, Giuliani and his team, and the Republican senators and legislators who attempted to assist him around January 6th and around the alternate electors. And, the right here in, where is it, Chaska, where steal the, what was it? Stop the steal. Who's the boy who makes the pillows? The Pillow King.
Oh,
Yeah, I can't think of his name, but I know you
My
mean.
Pillow, and
Yeah, he's the chief conspiracy nut, and one-time candidate for governor in the state of Minnesota. But and again, 74 million people voted for this president, and more than half of the members of the Republican Party who have been polled statistically believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump by Joe Biden. So
well, they passed
the
a
victim doesn't
resolution
just exist in Washington, D.C.
in Texas. They passed a resolution at the Republican National Convention or whatever down in Dallas, and said that Joe Biden was not the legal president.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they still believe this.
Yeah, they do. And if the Mexicans would come out and vote, we could change the political landscape in Texas overnight.
I just said, how do we mobilize the Latino, the LBGQ? I can't get the rest of it out.
The alphabet people.
Yeah. But how do we mobilize them? We better, because if the Senate,
well, we can't mobilize them, Brenda.
Huh?
We can't mobilize them. Number one, any mobilization has to occur within their own ranks. Okay,
yeah.
Because they're going to follow their own leader's cue much quicker than they're going to follow ours, even though they stand on our shoulders in terms of their own collective advance.
Well, we're not following ours, not just in the Twin Cities, nationwide. We're not following ours.
Not as effectively as we must.
No.
Okay. But
because when we were revolutionaries, we made some progress. We scared them. I told you about Bobby Seale. I remember that, Yusef. So I saw that.
And they went to Sacramento.
Shoulder.
and one of the Capitol staff members gave them the wrong directions, and they walked onto the legislature floor.
I know.
The shotguns and the weapons.
Al, we were talking about.
And I sent the two of you an article this week. I hope you read it, about when the NRA supported gun reform.
That's where they came from.
Went into the state capitol. And see, in California, if you live in Los Angeles and you want to affect legislation, you have to hire buses and you have to ride 400 miles up to Sacramento. Mm-hmm. We are one of the few states, Brenda, where the capital is in the largest urban area in the United States. I mean, literally,
that's interesting.
on the edge of the hood in the capital city of St. Paul.
And I understand the halls are just gorgeous.
But my point is that it takes us 5 or 10 minutes to get to the state legislature to lobby, to speak to our representatives, to fight for, meaningful public policy change. And if 3 people go into a committee hearing, they call the Capitol Police because they suspect that a riot is going to take place. And I'm sure that's not just here in Minnesota. That's all around the country. Black people are a rarity in state political circles. Now we're seeing more activity in the South than here in the North. But, just imagine what they're doing in those hearing rooms when there's nobody present to watch or check them or raise questions about what the impact of negative legislation is going to be in our community. So we've got a lot of work to do.
And they take the Senate. We're looking at Social Security cuts. We're looking at Medicare cuts. I think we need to let people know what is at stake. But we did that, Yusef, in that article that we did last year. And I think we need to go back, and
Maybe we need to reprint it.
well, we really need to talk about that. And hello, Dr. Irma. And she has been preaching this voting for months. And the fact that we just don't get it. But, we still have to have, quote, conversations. And I remember when I first met Dr. Irma, she said, we've got to write articles, we got to write books, we have to use our voice. And didn't even know her, and I was saying, bravo, because we have to. And
Yes, ma'am.
I know how important it is when we had that interview with Tito and Black Music, Pete Rose.
Pete Rhodes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you watched that show, Yusef. I had to bring out the Kleenex. That was a good show. And so when we continue to talk about these things, I feel like I'm an outsider, but I know that these things are happening in North Carolina, in Kansas City, in Santa Fe. I live in a complex where there are 2 Proud Boys. And I have to be very careful because they're very serious. But my oldest daughter just told me, she said, Mom, it's not black and white. It's about people. And you can't live in fear. So, from the mouth of babes. But it is what it is. And Dr. Irma was right from the very beginning. We can say all of this, about the hearings, but we've got to vote, and we've got to get people out there to vote. It was a guy from Illinois that was on CNN yesterday morning, and he was a former prosecuting attorney. And he said, what you have to understand, when they passed that resolution in Texas that Biden didn't win, that's who they are. Understand who they are, accept it, and accept the fact that the only way we're going to win is to beat them.
Irma, are you in transit?
I am in transit. I'm sitting here in Boston Logan Airport.
I was getting ready to say, what continent?
And I just finished a recording. WGBH has commissioned American Masters, that series. The 2 filmmakers who made the Lorraine Hansberry documentary is making one on Zora Neale Hurston. And guess who's going to be in it?
PBS. Go ahead, girl. Excellent.
Great. Congratulations.
Yeah. Excellent.
And then also I was able to get up to UMass Amherst and do some work and talk to people about the archive, lighting the fire under we need to get some money in so that we want to create a center, the McLaurin Black Feminist Archive Center. That's the vision. And to try and find support for that. I mean, as much money as people are talking about, there's still so much that needs to be funded, and foundations have not been as generous as they could be. They're finally acknowledging that even when they say they're giving to racial justice and programs on race, class, and gender, we're still being underfunded in comparison to other things.
There was a good article that came out this week pointing out Villanova, the Indian guy, indigenous person who wrote the book about plantation philanthropy. And they pointed out that these foundations and corporate giving programs do not have any staff that are knowledgeable, that have relationships, that are familiar, or who have any connections to the very communities that they claim since the murder of George Floyd that they want to assist. So they're either powerless or misdirected or sitting on their thumbs because they don't even know how to conduct a conversation, or which organizations are legitimate and which are bogus, who the people are with their finger on the pulse in our communities. And so the billions of dollars that have been pledged are just sitting there lingering within
and also what they're doing is that they're hiring very young people, which is admirable. But you also need some seniority there. People don't know what they don't know if they don't
There's
have
no memory. no
Yeah,
memory.
they don't have the experience, so they don't know what they should be challenging. So this is a real crisis. And I think foundations have to take responsibility for the barriers they put up. Al, you know this from the work I did with the University of Minnesota. People couldn't become vendors because they had these outrageous conditions that if you were a large white vendor, it worked for you. But if you were a small multiracial vendor, they became barriers. And so they haven't looked at how their own processes, like they ask for documentation and budgets and things. So if someone is starting a new nonprofit, they can't even get their foot in the door because they don't have 2 years worth of finances. That doesn't mean they're not doing good work. So there are all these barriers that are built into the very structure of the philanthropic process that never gets examined at all.
There also are IRS barriers.
Does it mean that it's time to examine the whole concept, the process, the philosophy of philanthropy? On the one hand, our community, Black people, documents indicate give and give freely through systems that are native to our community, church in particular, and giving to friends, family, neighbors, neighborhoods, neighborhood associations. But the public message, the public narrative in the white public is that Black people don't contribute.
And
Well,
that's
yeah,
a misnomer.
It's a
When
huge misnomer.
yeah.
But
when
As
I
you,
was when
I'm
I was
sorry.
at
Go
the
ahead, Dr. Irma.
When I was at the Ford Foundation, 2005 to 2007, Lynetta Gilbert, who's out of New Orleans, was a senior Ford Foundation program officer. And she actually did a whole study in which she looked at Black philanthropy. And she started establishing what you call giving circles. What's happened is that when Blacks give philanthropically, the money gets diverted. So, for example, at an institution that shall remain nameless, I know someone who was trying to get an funding for an endowment for a Black professor who had passed away. And she had cultivated someone. As soon as the person said they were willing to give, the dean of the library took over and then got that person to divert the funds to something they wanted. So unless the program officers are in positions of power and are able to challenge, they could do all the legwork to get people who are willing to give, but they don't have ultimately control over where that money goes. If once it's like who closes the deal? Like they cultivate and then somebody else comes in and closes the deal, and then that person can direct that funding, to whatever they want because the person who's giving it doesn't know any better.
Well, I think Ford is an exception. Ford also put a question on their applications requiring grant applicants to indicate how many women and people of color they had on their board, even though the question had absolutely nothing to do with whether or not they got a grant.
Right.
And they saw an incredible increase from one year to the next. I think it was greater than 20% of the applicants who came in every year now had many more women and people of color on their boards of directors simply because the question was on the application. And I have worked for, served on the boards, and been affiliated with a number of private community uh, corporate giving programs and foundations. And two things are true. One is that the community-wide giving programs, and I don't want to name anybody, but the initials are the United Way, help a lot of people in our community stand on their own two knees. Okay? They will fund you to work in a very tiny geographic area and prohibit you from collaborating with others doing the same work in adjacent communities so that you can take a gulp out of issues rather than a series of little tiny restricted nibbles. The other thing that's true, as Irma just pointed out, and the research is too thoroughly documented to debate, is that Black people, as a percentage of our income, give far more to philanthropy and to nonprofit entities than any other group in society. And in reality, the rich give to the arts, the middle class give to the church, and the poor give to the IRS because we have fewer disposable dollars to contribute or spread around. But we also need Black people serving on the boards of nonprofit organizations. Those nonprofit organizations need to get directors and officers liability insurance to protect the volunteers who agree to serve on their boards, because when you serve on a nonprofit board, you are legally and financially liable for the activities of that organization. So if there's anything shaky in terms of the funds or the program or the people, as a board member, you can be financially and legally liable for that. So nonprofits need to protect their governing boards. The other reality is that many nonprofit boards in our community are treated as advisory boards rather than governing policy boards, which is their accurate role. And we see strong founding executive directors, presidents, CEOs, whatever title they wish to embellish themselves with, who basically run the organization and use their board of directors as, again, the party that is legally and financially responsible as an auxiliary advisory body rather than the governing body. Because if you look at Congress, okay, the Congress proposes, and then the government is responsible for disposing, for implementing the policies that Congress and the Supreme Court and the executive branch enact. And the same thing is true in a nonprofit organization. The board proposes or determines what that organization is going to do and what direction they're going to take. And the executive director, the president, the CEO, the staff members are responsible for disposing the will of the board of directors. And if that doesn't happen and you're on one of those boards, then you need to find somewhere else to contribute your time and talents.
And I think what happens, Yusef, I mean, I think this is probably why I haven't been invited to sit on any boards. They don't want people who are knowledgeable about the process. So people want me to sit on a community advisory board, but they don't want me to sit on the board that's actually making decisions. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You know, so as much experience as I've had, I've never been invited to sit on a board.
Wow.
That's interesting.
I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
And
They
so
don't
to
want
me,
the truth,
to me, the question is, at what point do we shift the conversation about why the money exists in philanthropy anyway? How whose money
to avoid paying taxes, clearly.
And then what does the positioning of that money do relative to the existence of the consequences it proposes to be solving or looking at? And in the old days, the consequences were not looked in an adversarial way, as you've described, Yusef. They were philanthropy looking at supporting the arts. And in modern times, through modern struggle and consciousness, organizations, governments, civic, and and business organizations decided they had an obligation to address the communities and the challenges of poverty, et cetera. So at some point in time, isn't the need to look at the relationship between the source of accumulated wealth and the problems that we say we want to address? Irma, what do you think?
I mean, I think we can look at it, but the issue is that this is private money. And at the end of the day, if Gates gets up in the morning and decides that instead of discovering the next cure for malaria, that he wants to go and do something about windmills or solar, it's his prerogative. It's his money. And no one can make him accountable for something that might be more urgent. And I'll give you an example. Sickle cell anemia is a disease that affects far more people than probably any disease in the world, because most of the people who are impacted are in Africa. So it has a high population. And yet the amount of research that's done on sickle cell research is very minute in comparison to the number of people who are impacted. So clearly, the impact of a disease is not the reason for why research gets funded or not. It's who thinks it's important and how much money they're willing to put behind it.
Al, you asked about 5 questions. Number one,
Yep.
Rich people did not want to pay taxes and give their money to the government, so they created private foundations so that they could deduct that from their taxes and determine how they wanted their money used locally, nationally, or internationally. Furthermore, the restrictions or the criteria that surround corporate and foundation giving programs are process issues. They're not outcome issues. They're not obligated to be successful or to help a certain number of people. They only have to follow the process of giving the money to 501c3 organizations, tax-deductible groups, and of requiring those groups to provide minimal or nominal reports and to publish an annual report indicating what they have done, what grants they have made, who serves on their board, how much money they have distributed. And they're required, if it's many foundations are required to give a minimum of 1/2 of the interest that those funds have generated. So people talk about establishing a trust. For every dollar that you put into a trust, only 2.5 cents can be spent each year because, again, the IRS really limits what foundations and corporate giving programs can do.
Is it only or at least 2.5%?
It is a minimum of 2.5%.
At least, yeah.
The least that they can give.
Yeah.
And the theory is that by only giving 2.5%, the trust will grow by 2.5% each year, and each year there will be a little more. But the 97.5% of the money is put in trust and does not go out the door. Okay, only 1/2 of the. If they make 5%, they give 2.5%. Okay, so they, as Dr. Irma pointed out very correctly, they determine what their criteria are, who they give to. And I went to a National Council on Foundations meeting, and there was a foundation in Texas. I think it was called the Hogg Foundation, HOGG. And I was in a huge civic center with sterling silver and mimosas and, people with towels on their arms. And this foundation had 3x5 index cards sitting on the table, and everybody else had annual reports that cost about $28 a piece to print. And I picked up one of the cards because I was curious because the table was so sparse. And it said, we have 3 rules. Number 1, if your proposal is more than 2 pages, we won't read it. Number 2, we meet when we feel like it. We don't have a regular meeting schedule. And number 3, we had a right to change these rules anytime we wish. And I thought that was the most honest and straightforward set of foundation guidelines that I've ever seen. Make it less than 2 pages. Give it to us. We'll get to it when we can, and we'll get back to you.
And that's what I used to create a template for my grantees, and my portfolio at Ford was a hodgepodge, but it was mainly organized around Black studies, women's studies, and research on race, class, and gender. Mm-hmm. When I left, they disbanded that particular portfolio. Up until that point, nobody else was funding it. So Black studies had no place else to go. I was trying to bring HBCUs back into the fold because they had basically been forgotten by foundations. And people don't understand is that these are folks who are going through a lot of stuff very quickly. If it's over a certain amount, they're not going to read it, right?
Were you there in the Frank Thomas era?
No, I was there afterwards. The person that he mentored, Susan Beresford, I was there during her reign.
Okay. Did you work with Bernie Glover or Terry Sario or?
No, those folks, some of them may have still been there, but I was in the education and scholarship.
Okay.
But what I wanted to say is that one of the things that only Ford just changed when Darren Walker came in, which is that they would fund programs and not operations. And so you have people writing these grants and having to justify and write reports, but they can't keep the lights on because they have no operations money.
General operating support, critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that has been a flaw, I would say, in foundation funding, particularly for small, non-white organizations, because the other ones have donors that they can go to who can help them with the operations, but the small nonprofits don't. So they're constantly writing different kinds of grants just to be able to stay afloat.
I always referred to it as administrative reimbursement, because if you called it administrative overhead, it was the first thing that they chopped.
Let me ask both of you, all 3 of you actually, to consider 2 things. One, it's a question I raised earlier. Is there a court of public opinion that though private money doesn't have requirements in the philanthropy arena that can shift the nature and the volume of giving because of what the public opinion or the court of public opinion can do to, with, about, against the source of the revenue. It's question number one. How can ordinary people influence decision making? If they can, maybe they cannot. Question number two is, how do we as African people, African Americans, Africans in the West, the diaspora, develop within our own community systems that enable us to provide support, revenue, funding for our initiatives that don't depend on people outside of our community? Irma, why don't you start? What do you think?
I'm going to start with the last question first. I think we have to start supporting entities and organizations, and the nonprofits in our communities have to start collaborating with each other rather than competing with each other. You know, that was what I found when I was working around UROC, is that people wanted to compete versus collaborate. And that becomes a real problem. And I saw this when I was at Ford funding Katrina. I had some Black businessmen who contacted me and said, we would like to work with you to see if we can fund, but we'd like these institutions in New Orleans to collaborate. And when you contact them, some said absolutely not. They wanted their own brand, their own stuff, and they ended up not getting the money. So I think collaboration and cooperation, we have to start putting the money in ours. And we've got to get out of this notion that we have to have our own thing. You know, if every football player or pro athlete put $1 million into some money, into a foundation, into a pot, as opposed to having their own thing where they do their individual thing, we could do a lot with funding that. Even if they put a percent in, we could be supporting HBCUs, they may have a wonderful message, but they have very poor infrastructure. They can't compete with white institutions for students because they don't have the technical and the infrastructure support to be able to do that. Their labs are out of date. Their faculty haven't had raises in forever. They have no retirement plans. Most have abandoned the idea of tenure because they don't have the ability to keep faculty on forever. And so I think we have to look at ways in which maybe some of the money that goes into tithes could be going into philanthropic organizations that fund within the community. And then to answer the first question, I think if something claims to be a community foundation, then I think the Court of Public Appeals of public opinion should have something to say. They should write letters and say, we see that you say you're a community foundation, but you're not funding our community. What's up with that?
Yusef, what do you think?
In response to number one, there have been people like Stanley Williams, Steve Belton, and a handful of others who have served on the boards of major private and community and public foundations. And I think that, you know, we spoke about this in the beginning of the program, that they've pledged all this money, but they don't have the expertise or the resource in-house in terms of how to address focusing and directing that so that it will have the intended impact. Number two, if an organization is living solely off of corporate and foundation or community giving campaign grants, they're going to be very restricted in terms of what they're able to do. Consequently, there are a lot of organizations in our community who are helping people who are in trouble. There are very few that are helping people out of trouble. And so we see people operating these revolving doors that keep people in poverty and keep their head count up high so that they can continue to go back and say, here's how many people we served last month or last year, and we have to keep serving them or something bad will happen. The notion of building capacity, of self-sufficiency, of helping people out of trouble rather than simply helping people in trouble is not a common conversation within this community. And I think that, again, if another reality, and when we founded the Philanthropy Project, which was the prequel to the Minnesota Council on Nonprofits, we did a study of the top 40 foundations in Minnesota, and we used numbers instead of names, and we looked at their annual reports, and we dissected how much money went to people of color, to women and girls, to seniors, how much money went to constituency governed organizations where a majority of the people on the board of directors reflected the constituents that those organizations alleged to be serving. And what we found was that very, very little money went to constituency governed organizations or to organizations serving communities of color, women and girls, men and boys, and the programs that allegedly were serving people of color, the majority of their board members came from the majority culture. So you can imagine that the decisions, the determinations, the choices that they made for the policies and programs that they were going to operate were the furthest from what the priorities were within those particular communities. So it's important, again, that people try to get on these foundation, community, private, corporate, and other boards. There are a lot of people of color in significant positions within private Fortune 500 companies, and they can have a great deal of influence in how those corporate contribution programs operate and who they serve. And it's important that their voices also become a part of that process, because when John Mitchell was the head of Honeywell, that's how Sabathani Community Center purchased the former Bryant Junior High School, 165,000 square foot building on 7.5 acres of land. And John Mitchell gave us a grant to buy the building outright, to pay off the mortgage, rather than to have to spend 30 years paying interest and principal on that particular property. And Ellis Bullock was at the United Way. He was at the Grotto Foundation. He was at the Johnston's Foundation. Liz Pegues was at the Bush Foundation. I was at Northwest Area. We had a coalition of Blacks in philanthropy who met, who exchanged information, who supported and complemented one another, and who tried to work together on important issues in our community. And I think that's needed as much today as it ever has been.
And Yusef, would you
right,
say that when that group was in place, that more happened? Because what I'm seeing is that even if you have Black leadership or non-white leadership, it doesn't necessarily translate, into the filtering down.
Yeah.
And I would say another arena, because people who work at foundations tend to stay there forever. What was interesting about Ford, how I got in the door, is that they had a rotating position.
Sure.
And so they would, every 3 years or 4 years, you would change it. What I found was that although technically it was rotating, there were people who had been at Ford for 12 years, 15 years, because they had found some mechanism for these white men and these women to keep moving. The same wasn't true, for the Black folk, right?
Yes.
Not always.
They also had one of the most generous pension funds in the country for employees at Ford. And, many people left because they couldn't access those resources until they left the
Right.
foundation. Yeah.
But what I found was
we
when
told
I was
the top 40 that we did the research on, we threatened to publish the same report in year 2 using their names. And what is interesting, Dr. Irma, is that all you had to do was get their annual report and look at their total giving to see who the foundation was, number 6 or number 1 or number 5, was readily apparent to anybody who did a little research. Okay, so they were number 1 in the report, but obviously it was the McKnight Foundation, because they're the largest of the top 40 foundations in the state of Minnesota. If you read their annual report, you can see what their annual giving is. Their budget is bigger than Hennepin County, which is the largest county in the state of Minnesota. And simply by threatening to use their names the following year, they were in an uproar. And the increase in funding that went to constituency governed groups in communities of color skyrocketed in year 2 because they were afraid that we would use their names if they didn't increase the giving. But it was just a temporary blip, and they went back to business as usual because we didn't have the funding or the resources to do this on an ongoing basis. But it caught their attention. It pointed out the inequity, and they dealt with it, like they did after George Floyd was murdered. And hopefully we can find ways to liberate some of those pledges before they go back to business as usual.
Irma, we started off talking about the testimony at the January 6th hearings. And before we close, I wanted to get your impressions. One of the things we talked about was the story of Sister Shai Moss, who talked
and her
about
mother.
She and her mother were there, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, testifying about being personally targeted by the President of the United States. He and Rudolph Giuliani, accusing them of being responsible for thousands and thousands of illegal votes, and proposing or suggesting that they had evidence of them moving a thumbnail drive around, which they said can only be used for illegal purposes. Ends up, the item they were referring to from their video was a gingerbread mint or something. Breath mint. And so the tragedy, as we've written in our upcoming edition of Inside News, is this ability for Donald Trump to castigate and thereby put in danger, in personal physical danger, this Black woman, her mother, and her grandmother. Well, we all know what Donald Trump has said publicly about how he treats women and what he can do to women. And here's one more manifestation of that sickness, I think, that allows him to feel with impunity that he can denigrate and accuse these women and do it in a way that he knows results in people that are misguided, sick, will take action to harm these women. What have you watched that part of the hearing, and what do you think?
I had watched, some of it. I mean, I think we are dealing with a group of people, a segment of the society who has tremendous sway and power over people who have written their own story. That is, they've created a fiction, and they've come to let people believe, and people don't even need to know if it's true or not. They just want to believe, and beliefs are not facts. And it's very hard to argue when people have beliefs that you can't, it's not going to appeal to logic in that way. I think we're in a moment of time where white citizens in this country believe that they are losing out on something. They don't even know what it is. And it's the same kind of story that was fed to white workers, laborers, as to why they should keep Blacks out of the trade unions, because they're coming to get your place. Even though you've never had that place, it is a mistaken notion. And what surrounds it is this aura of, you're one of us. You may not have access to our power, our privilege, but you're still one of us because of your white skin. And people believe them, and I don't know how you can appeal, or I don't know how you can argue with people who are dealing in beliefs and not facts. They want to hear what they want to hear. And that's what they're appealing to, is emotionality. They're not appealing to common sense. They're not appealing to facts. They're appealing to the emotion of this loss. And this is not the first, we were not in danger, but I've certainly been challenged because I got a position at a college, and people would say, well, did she get that because she was Black? Did she get this because? And wanting to challenge and not looking at my credentials and the fact that they were better than theirs, but just this belief that somehow if we have something and they want to denigrate us, that they have an absolute right to do that. And that is part of the history of this country. This is a tragic sort of outcome for this group. But this is not the first time that this tactic has happened in this country, and it won't be the last.
If this is Rosewood and we've got a piano in the living room, somebody feels we don't deserve the piano, and they burn our house down
But it
and kill
goes
us.
back
If this is
now to
Black
what
Wall
you
Street.
say. It goes back to what you say. Just because we win doesn't mean that they lose.
Right. But they don't see it that way. They
No.
think any success that we have is an ascendancy over them, and that they are being deluded into thinking is where they have to draw a line. What they don't realize is that perhaps uh, uh, they simply are retarding their own development and their own growth and their own advancement, theirs included, towards the best possible humanity. So listen, we're out of time. Great conversation, Dr. Irma. Good to see you again. Thank you, as always.
Safe
Yusef, thank you as
travels,
always,
Dr.
Brenda.
Irma.
Thank you. Great conversation. We'll see you all next
Thanks.
time. Take care.
Stay
Okay,
safe.
take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Good. You, Yusef, do you are you a drinker at all by any chance?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. No, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to send you, with your permission, a sample of my brother's beverage. You've seen the ads in the paper for Revel. I don't know if you've seen that, but I don't know if I told you about that. That's
No.
one of our family businesses. My brother Micah is the owner of Revel Spirits Incorporated, and he's got this wonderful blue agave spirit that
Wow. Tequila?
it was not, but
Interesting.
you can't call it tequila. He's created a new brand called Avila. Story is same product from Weber Blue Agave, but it's not in the state of Jalisco. And Jalisco is just like the region of Champagne.
Or cognac.
Right. If the grape is not from there, it can't be called that. So they've got a product that's superior to anything that they have in Jalisco that's marketed under the brand name of tequila. But he created a new brand category called Avila in the state of Morelos, and has partnerships and a presence and the support of the government of Morelos in rebranding and exporting their product. And the product he created now called Revel Avila. So I'm going to send you a bottle just for your assessment and
Hey,
enjoyment.
my son considers himself a tequila expert.
Love to have his opinion on it.
His partner is Josh. I can't think of Josh's last name, but from This Is Us, the popular Emmy Award-winning series that just went off.
How do you drink it, Al?
I do, but not much, but I do.
How do you drink it? On the rocks or mix it?
I drink it I drink it straight. The best way for me is to drink it, just sip it, like in a shot glass or something like that. But
I'm going to run. Good seeing you, gentlemen.
Okay.
You too, dear.
All right.
I'm a single malt Scotch small batch bourbon drinker. And I like it on a couple of ice cubes, but I would definitely check it out. And our son comes over every other Sunday for dinner. Yeah. And I will get his opinion and share it with you as well, because all he drinks is tequila. And I keep telling him to get some blue agave, because that's the top of the line.
Yeah.
In terms of tequila.
Well, he's got three levels. I only have one, I think, in my possession. There's the añejos are top of the line. It's age, triple age or something like triple distilled in age.
Triple distilled, sure.
Yeah. And
then they do the same thing with rum.
They've got reposado, which is medium. And then they've got the blanco, which is the first level. I think that's what I have in my possession right now. If that's what I've got, I'll send you one. But I'll be getting some of the other stuff down the road. When I do, I'd be glad to share it with you just to get your impression.
Well, I appreciate that, brother.
Thank you for hanging in with me here.
No problem. No problem. The insurance company is going to pay for a new roof.
Oh, great.
So the adjuster came out last week and climbed up on his ladder, and they said, I have hail and wind damage. And they're going to spend $30,000.
Awesome.
And put a new roof on the front porch, on the house, and on the garage. And there were a couple of little dents in the garage door, so they're going to replace that too.
Ain't that good news?
Sorry I couldn't join you, but it was worthwhile.
I understand. Yeah.
And they were here for about 2 or 3 hours, but I've got a guy who does roofing, and he's licensed and bonded. He's got 35 roofing crews.
Okay.
And did you get that hail real bad in Northside?
We did get it, but it wasn't. I I didn't. It wasn't enough for me to look and see if there was any damage. I didn't suspect that there was damage, but I don't know.
Well, we had marble and quarter-sized hail over here, and it was
Mhm.
for like 15 minutes.
Mm.
It covered the yards. It covered
Mhm.
the streets. The cars
Mhm.
had to pull over. You know, I mean,
Okay.
it looked like a fresh inch of snow. That's how thick it was.
Okay. I don't think it was that bad over here.
Oh, it was. I was in the auto parts store,
Mhm.
and they had an aluminum roof, and they
Yeah.
had a glass foyer, you know, to
Mhm.
keep the wind. When you come in the wintertime, you go in the foyer, and then you go in the front door.
Right. Right.
And the windows were at a 45-degree angle, and that hail was hitting that, and the glass, they said, was a half-inch thick. I swore it was going to break. I mean,
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
and
Scary.
it sounded like the Elks drum corps was up on the roof, man.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, it was really. I've been here all my life, and I've never experienced anything like that, man.
Hmm.
Never.
Well, good you
White
came
man
out
better
okay.
quit messing with the environment, and we're going to be in big trouble. They say that
Mhm.
we're approaching the point of no return, that if we don't do something soon, the damage is going to be irreparable, and that our kids and our grandkids are going to be stuck with a serious environment that they had nothing to do with messing up, you know?
I think that's going to be the case. I don't suspect that we're going to be able to rise to that challenge. I think there's enough lethargy and profit-driven interest to not mobilize a sensible solution globally. So I
And
don't.
the people making the decisions are in their 80s, and they figure, hell, I'll be gone
Yeah, doesn't matter to
another
me.
10 years. So I'll let,
If my
you know,
grandkids got to do something, then that's their problem. I don't
let's,
even know them.
let's
I don't
keep
know my
shoveling that money in.
grandkids, right?
Yeah, let's keep shoveling that money in.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Sad,
Terrible.
real sad, you know. And then China's building a new coal plant every month.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's tough, man. It's real tough.
What,
How do you think this frontline workers bonus is coming?
well, I think it's a good idea. I don't know what the numbers are. The question is, are we getting enough of it out to Black people so that they know to apply for it? I know when they announced it, they had maybe 200,000 or 300,000 already applying the first day, I
Wow,
think. And
wow.
so I think the universe, they expect it to be something like 400,000 or 500,000. But the question was, how many of our people believed that we were in the number eligible to get the funding? And I proposed to Mahmoud Noor, I had him on a couple of weeks ago, that they make a special effort to communicate to people in our community, in our media, that if you are whatever the criteria are, you should apply. This money is for you as well. But as often as not, we either don't know about it, don't hear about it, or don't think it's for us.
And I
And
think
so,
the window is open through July 15th.
yeah. So I'll be hoping and promoting and asking them to put some messages in our ethnic media saying, you've served and you deserve, and this is for you. What
Well,
are you?
Minneapolis NAACP is having their Freedom Fund in September.
Mm-hmm.
We had ours Friday night.
How'd it go?
We had about 328 people,
Oh, great.
and we gave away 12 awards: religion, education,
Okay.
servant leadership. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Keith was our keynote speaker, and
Mm-hmm.
he got the Lifetime Achievement Award. He did a real good job.
Good.
But it was like 3.5 hours long.
That's long.
So like 12 or 15 different keynotes. You know, everybody who got to the mic wanted to tell their life story and
Sure.
their little pet projects and stuff. But
Yeah.
what are you gonna do? We made a little money. We had some sponsorships.
Mm-hmm.
We were working with a brother in terms of the marketing and stuff named Wes Smooth. Do you know him?
I know Wes. Yeah.
Disappointing.
Nothing happened, right?
Well, we
You
set
mentioned,
aside $5,000 for advertising.
yeah.
And he spent half of it advertising on his little internet radio station.
Right.
And we kept saying, what about Insight? What about Spokesman? What about, we finally managed to get some ads on KMOJ.
Yeah.
But one of the committee members had to initiate it.
Yeah.
And he was doing Juneteenth selling T-shirts and stuff. And he wants me to do a weekly program on his internet station.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about how closely identified with him I want to be, because I miss being on the radio,
Mhm.
playing music and,
Mhm.
reading poetry and talking stuff.
Mhm.
But, I don't just want to do it to be doing it. I'd like to think that, it would make a contribution.
Sure.
And, people who call themselves anti-racist
Mhm.
feel real comfortable telling people what they're against, but it's real hard to get them to deliver when you ask them what they're for.
Mhm.
And I think that's the way he's against an awful lot, but
Yeah.
clearly for himself.
Yep. Yeah. He hustles. He's a hustler. I know him. I knew him and his. I don't know if it was his wife or girlfriend, but his children's mother. I'm not sure if they were married or not. But she used to be a gym instructor at the Y over at Blaisdell, and Bobby and I used to go there every morning. We'd do our routine, but she was in behind the glass leading an aerobics class, and she was just very good. We used to be amazed that she must have been doing her workouts up until her 8th or 9th month, it seemed.
Wow.
I said, how you do that? But she was just high energy, positive, and just a wonderful and beautiful spirit.
She was making that delivery easier.
Yeah, probably.
They say walking is the best thing you can do.
Yeah. Well, she was doing aerobics big time,
Mhm.
What are you watching in Africa, man? Are you paying attention to developments across the continent in particular?
Primarily through the Times and the Washington Post.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what I get is selectively filtered. We have 83 military bases on the continent now,
Mm-hmm.
U.S. bases.
Yeah.
And you know that the Chinese are buying every square foot of land that somebody is not standing on,
Yep.
trying to get a foot in the door and make sure they continue to get them resources so they can make them cell phones and flat screens and laptops
and when they bring their commercial sector in, they're creating attitudes. They had problems in Ghana where Chinese merchants were acting funky towards Ghanaians, and
I'm sure.
they had a major attitude adjustment system going. But that's what'll happen. It's a colonial imperial mindset. So we've been colonized before, and we have to pay attention to look at all the modern iterations of colonization.
Well, that's what the Berlin Conference was all about, and how we
Yeah.
got that patchwork borders of those countries in the
Mhm.
1884 meeting that they held to divide Africa up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Germany went to war in World War II.
Yep.
Because
They
they
didn't get their share.
didn't feel they got their fair share.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they was going, that's why Rommel went to Africa to punish them.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell Germany doing in Africa with tanks and shit, But the Chinese are the new Saudis, okay, in terms of spreading money around. Do you know
Mhm.
what percent of the people in India go to school, get any kind of education? 10%. 10% of the population
Is in school only?
Yeah. And I think they're talking about in the age range of, 5 to 25, only 10% are allowed to go to school. And, China is behind them. Now, China is making progress, but it's real interesting what these folks are doing. And, some of the former colonial empires are very neo-colonialism. We used to say under colonialism, somebody else shoots you. Under neo-colonialism, you get to shoot yourself.
Yep.
And if you look at China or you look at some of these so-called third world countries that have gained their independence, look at what Mobutu did in the Congo.
Congo,
okay?
Yeah.
And not Mobutu. What was his name? The one who sponsored the Rumble in the Jungle. Always wore leopard skin.
It was Mobutu, wasn't it?
It was Mobutu Sese Seko. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who absconded. They said that he funneled $8 billion out of the country into Swiss bank accounts, had mansions all over the world, yachts. Was just taking the copper and the diamond money, and half of it was coming to him, kickback from the companies, and he just let them rape the continent. You know, I mean, they brought in them machines.
Not just him though, but he was an extreme case. But that's what Arma is hitting against again and again and again and again, and that's African complicity and African embrace of the neo-colonial posture.
Look at Nigeria, what they're doing in terms of all that oil stuff, oil and gas.
Yeah, all over Africa. Yeah,
and then look at what the Hutu and the Twa are doing, the Tutsi.
Yep.
Hacking off people's arms and limbs and shit, man. And,
same thing in Sierra Leone.
Oh, it's sad.
And their war, Liberia, same thing, Liberia. I had met, you might have known, what was the brother's name that was at the university who was Liberian? Remember him? I can't remember his name, but he was.
About Tony Martin?
No, he worked in HR at the university.
Tony was from the Caribbean. He was the garbage specialist.
Yeah, no, this guy was from Liberia. I'll think of his name in a minute, but his sister or cousins came over. He'd been here for a long time, and one of them needed a job and came to work for me. And but she told me about being in her house when government soldiers came in and started hacking people up, you know, and somebody was in the house that was in the crawl space above the main room. And they shot up and blood came down, right? And so how do you watch that and not be traumatized?
You know, if they weren't hacking, they were impregnating.
Yeah.
No, it's
so the question is, how do we finally, and do we or will we ever get to where we can move beyond the European originated boundaries and give meaning to the Pan-African idea that those boundaries are artificial and obstacles to our collective development. And until we figure out how to relate to each other differently without the intervention and without the approval of the Europeans, we're going to always be in a situation where structure prevents us from winning in ways that we say that we want. And the problem is that too many of us are too easily bought off and decide that the work is not worth it, and it's easier to take the paycheck and keep moving.
We tried out through the Pan-African Institute. Vusi sent thousands of transistor radios through the group he started called Anyanya to the Sudan when they were fighting over there to help the more progressive side communicate. And we tried to do it through Six-Pack, the Sixth Pan-African Congress. And they really disrespected the sisters. You know, if they wouldn't sleep with them,
you know, I think we're still live, Yusef. Let me turn this off. I'm sorry.
No problem, bro.
Well, we can keep talking. It's okay though.
Yeah, telling the truth.
Yeah, let's keep talking.
A lot of the people who were involved in Pan-Africanism, if the sisters wouldn't sleep with them, they wouldn't let them participate. And it was a very top-down, male-oriented process. The same thing, you know, Gary, Indiana, the National Black Political Assembly, a lot of the efforts here. So a lot of the sisters went off and did their own thing. And, you know, we were divided trying to be helpful. And then Nikki Giovanni went over there and in spite of the sanctions against performing in South Africa and lost a lot of her credibility. I noticed, though, that she was at the Humphrey Institute, a year ago or something. TPT keeps rebroadcasting her speech, her poetry. And, you know, they bring in people like the sister who wrote For Colored Girls When the Rainbow Is Not Enough. She read from her book, Ntosake Shange. She read from her book for 30 minutes and they gave her $45,000. So we figured we would divert our attention to working with the brothers and sisters in the joint, you know, and so Cambone and I were doing the federal prison up in Sandstone, and I was teaching up in St. Cloud, and I was teaching at the women's prison in Shakopee, and Baby James Eubanks was my teaching assistant at Stillwater. We were running pretty hard, you know, 5-6 days a week, but and then whenever I would go out and record, you know, whoever was in town speaking, I would send copies to the prisons. It was easier when it was on cassette
Mm-hmm.
and then CDs. But, what are you going to do? I've still got those tapes. I'm trying to give them to the African American Museum in D.C., but I've got two conditions. One is that they make the material available free
Mm-hmm.
to anybody who wants to download it. They can't
Mm-hmm.
sell it.
Mm-hmm.
And two is that I want a digital copy of everything that I give them,
Mm-hmm.
so that because it's all broadcast quality.
Yeah.
And it's not doing any good down in my basement.
But you got about 5 years worth of interviews?
No, I've got about 30.
30 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I tried loaning some to KMOJ, and when it came back, it had gangster rap on the tapes. And
They taped over it. Yeah.
I had to discontinue that real quick because,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember when John Henry Clark came out to Spring Hill.
No, I wasn't around.
For an entire weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And so I lost some good material. I still have quite a bit, but
I only saw him when he was over at, I must have been over at Mount Olivet in St. Paul. Was that Mount Olivet Church?
well,
That he spoke
Pilgrim,
at? Huh?
Pilgrim maybe.
It was a Pilgrim, yeah.
Pilgrim
Yeah.
Baptist.
Yeah.
Him and John Henry Clark, yeah. And Joseph Ben-Jo Cannon.
I saw him. Yosef was at the university, wasn't he?
Hmm?
Yosef Ben-Jo Cannon was at the University of Minnesota, I think.
Well, he
He's
was
that far
at
tall.
McAllister a lot. Okay. We used to have them brothers speak 5-6 places. They'd come in here 2 days and say, look,
Mhm.
I got to go back to work to get some rest. Y'all work me too hard. And we got the money from McAllister because we had the Institute for African Education in the Commodore Hotel.
Mhm.
We were doing tutoring after school and on Saturdays for Black kids.
Mhm.
Joanne and Sylvia Hill and Joanne Favors and we had a bunch of people from McAllister. That's when John Warder, what was John's last name? Was
Ward.
at McAllister.
Oh, John. I just saw him a couple of days ago.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Wright, John Wright.
No, not
Nope.
John Wright. John Warfield.
Warfield. Okay, yeah.
He was a faculty member there, the only Black faculty member for several years, and he went to D.C. and became a high-class Marxist. But he got enough money for us. We had the entire basement in the Commodore Hotel till it caught on fire,
Mm.
and we were running 50, 60 kids a day through there
Mm.
for tutoring programs
Mm.
for school-age kids, K-12. Most of them were elementary and middle school, but it was a good effort.
Did you get a chance to check out this narrative program yet?
Not yet, no.
You need to be on there, man.
I am going to check it out because
you got so much information, and your recall is just phenomenal.
I was trying not to be any more embarrassed than necessary with this Freedom Fund dinner, because all these youngsters think they know everything. I gave them 150 files on a jump drive and wrote a 7-page memo called Lessons Learned, from 12 years of Freedom Funds. You think one of them monkeys would bother to read the 7 pages about lessons learned? It was terrible, man. Some woman wanted to introduce Keith, and they let her. She got up on stage, was walking away from the podium, was embarrassed, was rummaging, was rambling, Keith put his head in his hands and was shaking his head, man. I mean, didn't add any value to the program. And like I said, we had about 12 or 15 different keynotes because everybody that got up to the mic wanted to tell their life story and just go on and on and on. And, 3.5-hour program. They waited till the very end to do the ask, to get people to join and get money.
Sure.
And by then, half the people had left. We gave Mary McBee an award for being in the St. Paul schools for 52 years. She went up to the mic and said, well, the only thing other than thank you I can say is that it's way past my bedtime.
Oh, too long. Too long.
She was telling the truth.
Yeah.
But we acknowledged some people doing good work and, felt good about it. But, these young folks, they want to make decisions. the woman who was the chair of the committee was calling up the people they wanted to give awards to before the executive committee even voted on them. Okay. So what can you do after they've already been congratulated for receiving an award?
Right.
And in her committee report, she's bringing it to the executive committee for approval.
And I already told them. So, yeah.
And so, you know, the sales manager at the hotel, which is owned by the Malak tribe, the Intercontinental, is the assistant treasurer for the St. Paul chapter, you know, NAACP. And so she was, you know, telling people what they better do and, you know, told the photographer how he better shoot pictures. Okay, you know Dimitri Pendleton, King Demetrius.
Oh, yeah, sure I do.
Goes to all the protests and stuff. And he calls me Uncle Yusef. He came over and said, man, I'm about to pop this woman. I said, look, you're the photographer. You're the one graduated from, you know, photojournalism. Do what you need to do. That's the same woman that told you that you couldn't live stream this because Setu got an award and him and Sam Myers were out of town and wanted to know, was there some way they could watch the proceedings? So he volunteered to live stream it on his Facebook page, and she wouldn't allow him to live stream it in the hotel. You know, I mean, so it got real stupid.
That's crazy.
You know, when you criticize people and they ask you to help, I feel you're obligated to pitch in. You know, and so I bought the first 2 tickets for me and my wife. We had a VIP reception for Keith that he never arrived at.
Okay.
So it started off a little awkward. People were paying $25 to $40 to go to that.
Right.
And get 2 free drinks and free appetizers. But, you know, what are you going to do? The King said anybody can be a leader because anybody can be of service. So you just try to pitch in and, you know, you give them a half dozen pieces of advice, and if you're lucky, they pick up 1, you know.
Just so you know, we're still live. Just so you know that. But any impressions or thoughts about María Isa running for 65?
I don't know her. I know that there were 400 people who registered to be delegates. 52 of them showed up at the endorsing convention. 32 of them were Somali, and they were wearing Rina Moran T-shirts
for county. For the county seat. Rina Moran's running for the county.
Well, it was a county convention. They endorsed Rina, and she endorsed Kamisab, the Somali brother, who they were with. So the other person running for 65 is Mel Frost. He runs the Truce Centers in St. Paul.
Right, yeah.
Got one on Lexington and Selby and one on Payne Avenue. And then there are 4 people running for Tony Carter's seat because she's not seeking re-election.
Okay.
And so Rena is outgoing because she can't run for both. So Reverend Darrell Spence, Rena Moran, a brother named George, who I do not know, who already has his signs out, and they're not supposed to be up until June 25th. And they've been out for 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay.
And then I don't know who the 4th person is running for that seat. Do you know who Johnny Baby is? He had the bar on University and Chatsworth. He's running against Dai Tao for Ward 1.
Okay.
And do you know Zuki Ellis, who is was the chair of the school board?
Don't know that person either.
She's running against Sandy Pappas for the Senate seat.
Okay.
So there are a lot of people who say that they're interested in running. There has not been a lot of activity.
Okay.
And I think people are waiting until after the 25th when campaign season, you know, it's not going to pick up strong until the state fair. But
right. You know,
that'll be early to get out there and get that.
Well, we're going to be doing political stuff every Monday for sure, but several times a week because we want to make sure the discussion takes place in our community and that our voices get in the mix. Obviously, I'm looking at all the candidates market to our community through my newspaper.
Tell me about Maria.
Well, Maria is what she calls Soto Rican. She's Puerto Rican. You might know her mother, who's active in St. Paul. She's from the West Side. Her name is María Isa. María Isa, I'll think of the last name. But she is running for, I think, 65. Let me double check. I'll show you here.
Does she live on the West Side or she lives over here?
I think she's on the, well, let me see. Let me show you where she's at.
There's a 65A and a 65B. Carlos Mariani is stepping down.
She's going after Mariani's seat, I think,
Okay.
running for 65B.
65B. 65A is the one Rena had.
Right.
Rena had this half of it. And Sandy Pappas has the whole 65.
Right, as a Senate, yeah. So says she's a lifelong Minnesotan raised on West Side, cultural community organizer, international recording artist. I've seen her perform. She's performed up at Lucille's Kitchen. Singer, amazing. English.
How old is she?
Well, she's got to be, I don't know, but she's got to be, hitting close to, mid 30s to 40 now.
That's probably why I don't know her.
Yeah, but when I first met her, she was like maybe in her 20s, so maybe she's 30s something now. But she is a gifted improviser, rapper, MC, jazz singer, singing Spanish and English, and she's Puerto Rican. And so she testified at the United Nations a few days ago on behalf of Puerto Rico. And I was hoping to have her on today, and I had kind of pulled up a 2-minute clip of her testimony at UN looking for independence for Puerto Rico.
There are now more Latinos on the east side of St. Paul, Payne Avenue, than there are on the west side.
Okay.
And, the west side is the traditional Mexican-American community.
Right.
And it's like Minneapolis, like Lake Street, you got a lot of Central, South, and Latin Americans, not just Mexican Americans.
Right.
Yeah. But there's some differences in terms of priorities between the Puerto Ricans, the Mexican Americans, the Central, South, and Latin Americans. There's about 36 different ethnic groups who speak Spanish.
Yep.
Depending on which country their forebears come from. Just not unlike Africa. You got 53 independent African countries. And there may be a common language between a number of them. Like Swahili is a trading language. It's not a tribal language. But the brothers from Nigeria say Lagos is the Paris of Africa. and of course, the brothers from Ghana have a different opinion on that. But,
from Ghana and Johannesburg as well.
Sure. And it depends on, whether you're from Joburg or whether you're from the Horn, whether you're from, the West Coast. And Pan-Africanism had a stronger foothold in the United Kingdom and America than it did on the continent initially. Okay, because of the colonial influence, some of these brothers speak French, and then the brothers click their tongues in terms of Kosa.
Kosa, yep.
And rarely do the two trains ever meet. But no, it's interesting. I think about Orchard Mzanga. And I think about
Orchard died, right? Yeah.
No, I didn't know that.
He did, I think, because he was married to Lillian.
He was affiliated with the embassy in Sweden and shipped 42 Volvos back home. And they were looking hard for him to get some money for him. But Orchard I remember he sold his Mercedes to Kojo Odinga. And we had a Pan-African Institute retreat in Stillwater, and Odinga was all over the road because the steering was so loose. And Kojo was looking for Orchard to give him.
He's looking for Orchard, yeah.
And there was a brother named David Ochino from Kenya.
He's still around, I think.
No, there's some Ochinos here. One is a dentist. I don't know if they're related or not, but the FBI actually influenced the State Department. David was a student at the St. Paul campus.
Not the one doing the bookstore. That was Otino, right?
Yeah.
Who at the
And,
bookstore? Uhuru.
They sent David back to Kenya because he was involved with the Pan-African Institute.
Okay.
Because he was on our radio program every Saturday on the KUXL, and
Mhm.
he was teaching down at the Institute of African Education,
Okay.
African history to the kids. And they didn't appreciate that at all. And then there was a brother named Magnus Adelade
Mhm.
who told me that he was going home for Christmas. And I said, boy, sure, I'm jealous. I wish I was going with you. And my wife and I were out to Rosedale, buying some last minute Christmas gifts. And I said, gee, that looks like Magnus. I said, Magnus. And the brother put his chin on his chest, and kept on going. And I saw him about a month later. And I said, how was your trip home? He said, oh, it was very nice, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I saw a brother out to Rosedale looked exactly like you. He was with a white family. He said, that was me, brother. And I said, well, how come you didn't speak? He said, because I was with my American family. Because when he came over here, this American family sponsored him, or he stayed with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing he learned about the Black community was how to stay the hell out of it.
Yeah.
But Vusi and Mahmoud had to sue the African Students Association at the University of Minnesota because they wouldn't let Mahmoud and Vusi join because they said they weren't Africans. But yeah, we've put a lot of miles on, haven't we?
Amazing. Did you know Yogi Sena, Maestro Yogi Sena?
Not by
He
name.
taught capoeira here, with a Brazilian guy. And he's gone back to Brazil. That's what Brenda was talking about. He'll probably be on the program tomorrow, but he's connecting with me. And we had an emotional program yesterday because he came on. He sent me a note saying he wasn't going to be able to join. I think it was yesterday. It was Tuesday. And so I was surprised when he popped on and in a matter of a minute talked about the fact that he had just taken his son to a psychiatric hospital. And he went into the story of the son's treatment, which is why he left this country to go back home, where he thought he could find a better care and a better environment. Son was dealing with, diagnosed schizophrenia and bipolar, and had been suicidal, and had been in treatment here at the University of Minnesota
was he?
Hospital. I don't remember. I didn't ask him the age of the son, but Yogi must be like 50 or so, 55.
So probably a teenager.
Probably 24 or 5 years old now. I'm sure. That's what I'm thinking. He said he raised his son, two sons himself, and though the son, I'm presuming the son was born here, but he chose to go back to Bahia, where he's from. I was talking about sort of being a stranger in his own country because he's viewed locally now as an American, not as a Brazilian, but he's reacclimating. But one of the things we did last week was so the show was good because he had all this pressure on him he said that night, like last night, this was like Monday on the show, Tuesday on the show, Monday night, apparently the son had attempted suicide again, and he was able to intervene and got him to a psychiatric hospital in Bahia. Talked about mental health and about the pressures that we all deal with all over, the country.
Is the son back in Brazil or still here?
No, he and the son are both in Brazil.
Okay.
He took his son when he checked out of the university hospital at some point in time, I'm not sure when, he moved them both back to Brazil. And the son, however, obviously still needs care. And so he's under a tremendous amount of pressure. But the conversation, the openness in talking about it was, I think, healing and intense. Hopefully, I got to call him to see how he's doing, see how his son is doing. But I have the feeling that if nothing else, he needed somebody to talk to at that time. And he called in and talked to us. And if that was of value, I'm happy that conversation took place. Previously, he and I had connected. He had connected me to a group of people in Lagos, who were descendants of enslaved Africans in Brazil who had made their way back as cimarrones, I think they call them, or as
Wow.
what was the other Zumbi do Palmari. What's that group? They're like the Maroons in Jamaica, but a number of Brazilians had made it back to Africa and set up in Lagos, and now 2-3 generations of those families live there, and they've got a vibrant Lagos community of Brazilian Africans who are
One of the things that Black people in this country don't appreciate is that fewer than 10% of the Africans who were enslaved were brought directly to America.
Right.
The lion's share went to the Caribbean, went to Cuba, went to Central, South, and Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only after the Haitian Revolution that the French Catholic plantation owners came to America so that they could continue the plantation style lifestyle with slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reasons, the propagations of the enslaved really enlarged, the population grew and sustained itself and increased here in the United States much more than in many of the other locations.
Mm-hmm.
And, Brazil, Cartagena, there were huge slave ports in Central, South, and Latin America, in almost every country where Africans were brought. And in the Caribbean, there was a process called seasoning, mm-hmm. where they would literally break slaves.
Mm-hmm.
There was another process here in the States I won't talk about on the air called buck breaking,
mm-hmm.
where they would tie male slaves across a tree or a log, and then the white overseers would impregnate them in front of everybody on the plantation,
mm-hmm.
to diminish any respect or leadership abilities that they felt they had.
Mm-hmm.
And it was called buck breaking,
mm-hmm.
to ensure that nobody would listen to or follow them or consider the possibility of running away.
Yeah.
And, in terms of reparations, I think it may take as long as we were enslaved and have endured racial oppression in this country in order to completely erase and eliminate the vestiges, because mm-hmm. to this day, the slave exists in all of us who are ADOS, African descendants of enslaved Americans. It's just closer to the surface in some and deeper in others.
Mm-hmm.
And, all this gangbanging and shooting and raping and murdering and stuff is really just a contemporary manifestation of self-hatred and minstrelsy,
mm-hmm.
Where people have no hope. They feel they have no future,
no value.
They feel they have nothing to lose,
mm-hmm.
And so somebody makes a comment about how funny they looked on the dance floor on Facebook or Twitter, and they're trying to find a gun so they can go and rescue their manhood by killing somebody, and then they're looking at the next 18, 20, 24 years in prison as a result of it. And basically the prisons are now the new seasoning process
mm-hmm.
for bucks rather than, enslavement, because it is a form of enslavement, and the Constitution says so there. Slavery shall not exist except for punitive, purposes
mm-hmm.
in the prisons and under incarceration.
Yeah.
And in many states, people who, we're talking about voting and representation. In many states, people who have been in the joint are prohibited from voting for life.
Mm-hmm.
So how meaningless does that make your existence? Okay,
mm-hmm.
when you can't even vote on issues that could have a positive or negative impact on your quality of life. So it's gas, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me roll. Look, good talking to you.
And you, brother.
Okay.
My love to Bobby and the family. Okay.
Stay safe. Okay,
Okay.
take care.
In a minute.
Goodbye.